Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a clerk and a tourist about a short trip. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5.
Good morning, wonderful travel agency. How can I help you?
Good morning. I'd like to know about the information about your short trip. What's the name of the trip?
Magic One Day.
Right. Could you introduce me to the tour?
Of course, and we will give you a 5% discount if you book the latest trip.
Fine. When is the next one going?
We have a trip every Saturday, which usually departs at 8 o'clock in the morning.
And when will we come back?
About 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Fine. How about the type of transportation?
We like to keep our tours small, so we offer a coach or a minibus.
That's great. So how many tourists are there in one group?
Usually we take about 15 to 20 tourists, but you know it is peak time now, so the number is up to 25 tourists.
Well, that sounds good. So how much is the tour price?
As I said, I will give you a 5% discount, so the cost is £18 for each person.
Great! Does it include lunch?
No, but the guide fee has been included.
Do I need to book a seat?
Yes, at peak season, in order to ensure your position, seat reservation is needed, so the tourist has to reserve a seat at least 2 days before leaving.
Now, look at questions 6 to 10. Okay, and how about the deposit?
You don't need to pay any fees in advance.
Fine. How about payment? Cash or credit card?
Because we collect money just before departing, the only payment we accept is cash.
Fine. I see.
That's okay. And let me confirm you with your customer reference number.
Fine.
That is FC864.
Right, I'll write it down.
How about other things do you want to know?
Yes. I'd like to know what attractions we will visit during the tour.
Well, let me check the time schedule. We will start at 8 o'clock and will arrive at Edinburgh about 10 o'clock. The first resort we will visit is Old Castles, the most famous Scottish castles. It is the home of the Scottish crown jewels, the oldest royal regalia in Britain.
Well, may I take photos?
Of course.
I heard that the City Hall is a good place. Will we go there?
The next tour does not include that place.
Okay.
And then we will go on to St. Giles's Cathedral, with 1,000 years of history. It is renowned for its stained glass, regal organ and beautiful thistle chapel.
Great. Is it near to the zoo?
Yes. After lunch you will visit Royal Palace. It is a good place to know about royal family's life, but it has a rule with no photo.
Right.
But you can pick some souvenirs in the local handicraft shops close to the palace.
Great.
and about 4 o'clock we will get to the Seabird Centre.
Do you mean the aquarium?
No, they are different places.
Okay. Does it have an animal performance?
Sure, you can appreciate the play of dolphin and sea lion.
It sounds good.
About 6 o'clock we will return. If you need other information, please read our tour booklet.
Fine. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. You will hear an extract from a talk about employment interviews. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14.
Today I have with me Sandy Richardson of the local Workforce Center, and she'll be talking about that critical step towards the goal of employment, the interview. Sandy, what is an interview for, and what's the best way to approach it?
A job interview is simply a meeting between you and a potential employer to discuss your qualifications and see if there is a fit. The employer wants to verify what they know about you and talk about your qualifications. If you have been called for an interview, you can assume that the employer is interested in you. The employer has a need that you may be able to meet, so it's your goal to identify that need and convince the employer that you're the one for the job. As everyone knows, interviews can be stressful, but when you're well prepared, there's no reason to panic. Preparation is the key to success in a job search, and you can begin by collecting together all the documents you may need for the interview, such as extra copies of your resume, lists of references, and letters of recommendation. You could also take some work samples, selecting from what you have designed, drawn, or written, for instance. And make sure you have a pen and pad of paper for taking notes. The next step is to find out about the post. The more you know about the job, the employer, and the industry, the better prepared you will be to target your qualifications. Always request a job description from the employer and research employer profiles at the Chamber of Commerce or local library. You could also try to network with people who work for the company or with employees of companies associated with it. The next step is to match your qualifications to the requirements of the job. A good approach is to write out your qualifications along with the job requirements. Think about some standard interview questions and how you might respond. Most questions are designed to find out more about you, your qualifications, or to test your reactions in a given situation. If you don't have any experience or skills in a required area, think about how you might compensate for those deficiencies.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20.
During an interview, it's important that you be yourself. Get a good night's sleep and plan your travel to be there in plenty of time so that you're not arriving out of breath with 30 seconds to spare. Don't, though, present yourself for the interview too early, 10 minutes at most. In the interview, listen carefully to each question asked. Take your time in responding and make sure your answers are positive. It's important to express a good attitude and show that you're willing to work, eager to learn, and are flexible. If you are unsure of a question, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. In fact, it's sometimes a good strategy to close a response with a question for the interviewer. In general, focus on your qualifications and look for opportunities to personalize the interview. Briefly answer questions with examples of how you responded in comparable situations, from either your life or previous job experiences. Something you should avoid are yes or no responses to questions, but don't dwell too long on non-job related topics. Use caution if you are questioned about your salary requirements. The best strategy is to avoid the question until you have been offered a job. Questions about salary asked before there is a job offer are usually screening questions that may eliminate you from consideration, so be warned. On the other hand, it isn't inappropriate to show your enthusiasm if your first impressions of the interview and of the employer are good ones. So, if the job sounds like what you are looking for, say so. Keep in mind that the interview is not over when you are asked if you have any questions. Come prepared to ask a couple of specific questions that again show your knowledge and interest in the job. Close the interview in the same friendly, positive manner in which you started. When the interview is over, leave promptly. Don't overstay your time. Think about the interview and learn from the experience. Evaluate the success and failures. The more you learn from the interview, the easier the next one will become. You'll become much more confident. To close, here are a few more tips. First, maintain good eye contact throughout the interview and be aware of nonverbal body language. Second, dress a step above what you would wear on the job. Go to the hairdressers, have a shave, etc. Remember that your appearance is a key indicator of whether you have the right attitude, so it can pay to give some thought to how you look. And finally, don't be a clock watcher.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear two university students, Phil and Stella, talking to their tutor about their research project. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27.
Come in. Ah, yes, Stella. Is Phil there too? Good. Come on in. Okay, so you're here to discuss your research project. Have you decided what to focus on? You were thinking of something about the causes of mood changes, weren't you?
Yes, but the last time we saw you, you suggested we narrowed it down to either the effects of weather or urban environment. So we've decided to focus on the effects of weather.
Right, that's more manageable. So, your goal is, Phil?
To prove the hypothesis, no, to investigate the hypothesis that the weather has an effect on a person's mood.
Good. And what's your thesis, Stella?
Well, Our thesis is that in general, when the weather's good, it has a positive effect on a person's mood, and bad weather has a negative effect.
Can you define your terms here? For example, what do you mean by good and bad?
OK, well, good would be sunny, warm weather, and bad would be when it's cold and cloudy or raining.
And how would you define an effect on a person's mood? What would you be looking to find?
An effect on the way a person feels.
A change in the way they feel, like from feeling happy and optimistic to sad and depressed.
Right. And what sort of weather variables will you be looking at?
Oh, sunshine, temperature, cloudiness, precipitation, among others. It'll depend a bit what the weather's like when we do the survey.
Fine. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, what about background reading? I gave you some suggestions. Did you manage to read any of it?
Yes, we read the Ross Vickers article, the one comparing the groups of American Marines training in summer and winter. That's quite relevant to our study. It was interesting because the Marines who were training in the cold winter conditions tried to cheer themselves up by thinking of warm places, but it didn't really work.
Yes, they were trying to force themselves to have a positive mental outlook, but in fact it had the opposite effect, and they ended up in a very negative state of mind.
And we found some more research by someone who wasn't on the reading list you gave us, George Whiteborn. He compared people living in 3 countries with very different climatic conditions. Actually, he looked at several things, not just the weather. But he found some people's reactions to bad weather were much worse than others, and it was linked to how stressed they were generally. The weather on its own didn't have such a significant effect on mood.
And we looked at a paper by
Haverton.
Yeah, he broke weather up into about 15 or 16 categories and did qualitative and quantitative research. He found that humans respond to conditions in the weather with immediate responses, such as fear or amazement. But these responses can also be linked to associations from their earlier life, such as a particular happy or sad event.
Did you have a look at Stanfield's work?
Yes. It was interesting because the type of questions he asked was similar to what we were planning to use in our survey.
Yes.
He asked people how they were feeling on days with good and bad weather. He found the biggest factors seemed to be the humidity. Moods were most negative on days with a lot of rainfall. Long periods without sunshine had some effect, but nothing like as much.
That could be quite a useful model for your project.
Yes, we thought so too. Although we can't continue our survey for as long as he did. He did his over a 6-month period.
You now have some time to look at questions 28 to 30.
Right. Well, you've made quite a good start. So, where are you going from here?
Well, we've already made the questionnaire we're going to use for the survey. It's quite short, just 8 questions. We're aiming to survey 20 people over a period of 3 months from October to December.
We can't specify the actual dates yet because it depends on the weather. We want to do the survey on days with a range of different weather conditions. And we'll just be working on campus, so our data will only be statistically sound for the student population here.
That's okay. Have you thought how you'll determine what will constitute each aspect of weather, and how many you're looking at?
We decided on 4. The amount of sunshine, cloudiness, temperature and precipitation. We thought we might use the internet to get data on weather conditions on the days we do the survey, but we haven't found the information we need. So we might have to measure it ourselves. We'll see.
Then we've got to analyse the results, and we'll do that using a spreadsheet, giving numeric values to answers. And then, of course, we have to present our findings to the class, and we want to make it quite an interactive session. We want to involve the class in some way in the presentation, maybe by trying to create different climatic conditions in the classroom, but we're still thinking about it.
I see. Well, that sounds as if you're on the right lines. Now, what I'd suggest that you think about, in addition to the work you...
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a lecture about an animal living in South America. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
Welcome to Magic Animal Time. Today I'd like to give you an introduction to a magic animal called sloth. Native to Central and South American rainforests, the sloth is the slowest animal on Earth. It needs 12 seconds to finish one step, even slower than a tortoise. Algae grows on its brown furry back because of its inactive lifestyle. Even the fur of sloths is adapted to their lifestyle. Sloths usually hang upside down, so their stiff, wiry fur grows differently from the coats of most mammals. Horses' hair, for example, grows from the back, so rainwater will run off. Below this tough top layer, a dense downy layer of hair provides additional protection from pesky insects. The greenish cast of the sloth's shaggy fur is caused by symbiotic algae that grow in grooves running along the length of each of the mammal's outer hairs. The sloth hosts the algae, and the algae return the favor by providing nutrition that the sloth either ingests by licking its fur or absorbs through the skin. The grayish-green color makes the sloth look just like a clump of dry leaves hanging from a branch. The perfect jungle camouflage. And the longer a sloth lives, the greener it gets. Sloths have a short and flat head, a snout that is short in length, big round eyes, long, tree-climbing legs, a stubby tail, and small ears. And though some have called them ugly, they have the cutest face that looks like they're always smiling, just like a koala in Australia. Sloths spend most of the day sleeping, curling up in a tree notch or hanging from a branch with all four legs closed together, their heads tucked between their front legs. People seldom see them much move, even when they are awake. Only at feeding time, sloths move more slowly and carefully, hand over and through the treetops, searching for leaves, fruits, and twigs. They even mate and give birth while suspended from their long, curved claws. Sometimes a sloth will die, hanging upside down from a tree limb, and remain so after death, until they decompose or are forcibly removed. Why do sloths have such an unusual lifestyle? It's the strategy they evolved to survive as tree-dwelling plant eaters in a place with many predators. Most domestic herbivores, such as cattle, horse, and sheep, graze all day long. Because they feed on nutrient-poor vegetation, they must eat almost constantly. Sloths are also classified as herbivores, and their diets are also low in nutrition. But rather than munching all day long, they have become masters at conserving energy. As any athlete knows, maintaining muscle requires large quantities of food energy, far more than a sloth's vegetarian diet can provide. Sloths are relatively inactive and usually spend most of their day hanging upside down, so they can get by with half as much muscle mass as similar-sized mammals. Hence, they don't need to eat too much. In addition, because of heavy muscle, sloths weigh far less than other mammals. This makes it possible for them to climb on thin branches high in the tropical forest canopy, where they can more easily find food and avoid heftier predators. Keeping a high body temperature also takes energy. Sloths fulfill this need by maintaining a lower average body temperature than other mammals. Dogs, cats, horses, sheep and cows all have average body temperatures between about 100 and 103 Fahrenheit, but a sloth's average body temperature is about 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Equally important, a sloth's body temperature fluctuates with the surrounding temperature. Like snakes and frogs, which are cold-blooded creatures, a sloth's body temperature is highest on warm, sunny days and lowest at night and on rainy days. Sometimes, a sloth takes a sunbath in the morning, warmed up. Then, during the hottest times of day, it hides in the shade so it won't overheat. During a 24-hour period, a sloth's body temperature may vary as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit. If the body temperature of a person, a cat, or a dog varies just 5 degrees Fahrenheit, it can be life-threatening. Because sloths have difficulty moving over land, they spend most of their time in the trees. They can get just about everything they need high above the forest floor, even water, which comes from eating juicy leaves and licking up drops of morning dew. Short bursts of feeding, followed by long periods of inactivity, make sloths less vulnerable to large raptors, such as harpy eagles, and other carnivores, such as ocelots. As long as sloths remain perfectly quiet and still, they're nearly impossible to detect. At feeding time, a sloth reaches out, grabs an overhead branch with its flexible feet, and tugs until the food is within reach of its long tongue. After pulling the vegetation into its mouth, the sloth clips the leaves with its hard, tough lips and slowly grinds them with a large, peg-like teeth. A sloth digests its food just as it does everything else, very slowly. People usually digest their food in about a day, but sloths can take about a month to finish the process. As soon as a sloth swallows a mouthful of pulverized plants, the bacteria in its stomach and intestines begin breaking down the food. It takes many hours for the bacteria to digest the tough plant material that makes up a sloth's diet. Only then can the sloth absorb the nutrients it needs to live and grow. So, do you have a new understanding about the slow but not lazy animal? Next week, we will talk about...
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.